We begin in Thailand, where thousands of anti-government protesters have taken to the streets again in Bangkok. The demonstrators occupied major roads and marched to a courthouse in the capital on Saturday. They demanded the resignation of Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha. He seized power in a 2014 military coup. The marchers also called for the reform of the monarchy and the abolition of the lèse-majesté law.
Prayut is not qualified to be the prime minister.
Ralliers at the courthouse engaged in a tense standoff with police. It lasted for several hours. The demonstrators held up signs demanding their leaders be released from detention. Young people in the country started taking to the streets again last month. They had halted their rallies due to the coronavirus outbreak. Human rights group Amnesty International says since last year, Thai authorities have charged nearly 400 protesters. It's nearly 10 years since the Fukushima disaster. Japan's prime minister visited the region on Saturday and vowed his government will keep pushing to revitalize affected areas. Suga Yoshihide went to the town of Okuma. That's where the damaged Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant is located. In a district where a government evacuation order was lifted 2 years ago, Suga inspected a new commercial center that will open this spring. Some other areas around the plant remain off-limits. Suga also visited the town of Namie. He spoke to residents who have returned there, as well as people who have moved in from other parts of the country.
People are taking on many new challenges in Namie. I want others to see what we are doing here.
Locals and people from other areas have been working together. I feel that's really sped up the reconstruction process.
Suga said meeting residents showed him that the town was getting a new lease of life. He also pledged the government will continue efforts to help more evacuees return home.
It may be a long way off, but the government has not changed its position that all evacuation orders should eventually be lifted.
An NHK survey of people affected by the massive 2011 earthquake and tsunami in northeastern Japan shows they have mixed views about efforts to rebuild their communities. The survey was conducted in December and January, ahead of the 10th anniversary of the disaster. It targeted more than 4,000 people who were living in the three most severely affected prefectures of Iwate, Miyagi, and Fukushima at the time of the disaster. The poll drew responses from 1,805 people. When asked about how they felt about the current state of reconstruction, 12% said the work had been completed, while 33.7% said there had been more progress than expected. In contrast, 43.3% said there had been less progress than expected, while 7.4% said they hadn't noticed any progress at all. The number of those who said reconstruction had been completed or that more progress had been made than anticipated was substantially lower in Fukushima than in the two other prefectures. The gap apparently reflects the lingering effects of the nuclear accident at the Fukushima Daiichi power plant. Evacuation orders are still in place in areas surrounding the plant. An international survey shows confidence in coronavirus vaccines is growing in many countries around the world as more people get vaccinated. Britain's Imperial College London and the pollster YouGov have been jointly conducting surveys about attitudes toward the coronavirus vaccines since last November. The latest survey was carried out in February. It covered around 500 to 1,000 people in each of 14 countries, including Japan, Britain, France, and South Korea. Those polled were asked how willing they would be to receive a vaccine if they could. They were able to choose from 5 answers, depending on the degree of their willingness. Britain was the country with the highest degree of confidence. 77% of the respondents there said they were strongly willing or willing to some extent to receive a vaccine. Denmark was second with 70% of the people saying so. The country where individuals were least willing was France. Only 40% of the respondents there showed a willingness to get a shot. Japan and Singapore came in at 48% each. The overall rate of those who said they would like to receive a vaccine stood at 58%. That is up 17 percentage points from November when the surveys first started. On the other hand, 45% of those polled said they are strongly worried or are worried to some extent about possible side effects from the vaccines. Japan had the highest rate of people who said they were worried at 61%. Singapore was second at 59%. South Korea and France had rates of 56% each. Italy's foreign minister has indicated his country will block more coronavirus vaccine exports out of the European Union if doses remain in short supply. Under an EU measure introduced in January, drug makers must get permission to ship locally manufactured vaccines out of the region. Luigi Di Maio spoke to reporters after Italy stopped a shipment of 250,000 AstraZeneca doses destined for Australia.
Supplies promised by drug manufacturers have been delayed, not only in Italy, but in all EU countries. Such delays are unacceptable.
De Maio says coronavirus variants are spreading fast in Europe. He says EU nations have the right to block vaccine shipments to less vulnerable places. A Russian research team has released a report on the first ever drone search conducted inside one of several craters found in the ground ice in Siberia. The report was issued in February. It contains the results of a survey conducted inside the 17th crater. That giant hole was discovered last July. The first giant cavity was confirmed in 2014 in Arctic Siberia, which includes the Yamal Peninsula. The discovery has raised concerns about the possible impact of the crater on nearby facilities, such as pipelines. Images taken by the aerial drone helped the researchers get a more accurate picture of the cavity's interior. The report says the hole had an average outer diameter of about 25 meters and a depth of about 30 meters. It also had large void spaces at the bottom that spread out horizontally. The scientists think the craters may have been created by blowouts of gas trapped under the permafrost.
Global warming has weakened the permafrost and caused it to lose strength on the surface, making it easier for gas to blow out.
The scientist added he wants to discover how the craters were formed.
In the Senate as the COVID relief bill inches its way forward.
Yes, overnight, Democrats finally reaching a deal on jobless benefits, swaying the party's lone holdout and appeasing some party moderates after a 12-hour stalemate over how high the payment should be and how long they should last.
President Biden is throwing his support behind the compromise, but the battle is not over yet. ABC's White House correspondent Mary Alice Parks is on Capitol Hill with what's next. Good morning, Mary Alice.
Yeah, good morning, Will. We saw late night deal breaking here behind closed doors. This bill is incredibly popular in polling, but Democrats still struggling to agree with each other. They're hoping to eke this out themselves because Republicans are still united that this bill is just too big. The U.S. Senate pulling an all-nighter, making last-minute changes to President Biden's nearly $2 trillion relief plan. Overnight, Democrats reaching a deal among themselves, clearing the way for a final vote to come if they stick together. The last 24 hours, full of fits and starts. West Virginia's Joe Manchin, a moderate, bringing activity on the Senate floor to a standstill for nearly 12 hours Friday, debating how to expand unemployment benefits put in place during this pandemic, set to expire for millions of Americans in just 8 days. House Democrats voted to up those payments to $400 a week. Manchin pushing a smaller proposal, finally reaching a deal with his Senate Democratic colleagues to keep benefits at $300 a week, but guaranteed through the first week of September. With exactly 50 Democrats in the Senate and no Republicans supporting his bill, President Biden had no room for error. Privately, he worked the phones, publicly called for swift action.
All those empty storefronts, aren't just shattered dreams, they're warning lights.
Republican leader Mitch McConnell commenting on the holdup among Democrats.
What this proves is there are benefits to bipartisanship when you're dealing with an issue of this magnitude.
On that proposal to raise the federal minimum wage, all Republicans voting no, along with 8 Democrats, including Arizona's Kristen Sinema, now facing criticism for this exaggerated thumbs down. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders promising to fight that fight another day. Both the House and Senate bills calling for most Americans to receive direct $1,400 payments and extra funding on tax returns for parents. Tammy Tripler, a single mom in Maine with 2 adult children at home, worries it still will not be enough.
Do we get fuel this week and stay warm and not freeze to death? Or do you get food? We're supposed to be one of the best countries in the world, and we have sunk so far. It's difficult to be proud when there's people hurting, when there's people without.
Now, the drama here overnight reminding the White House that with only 50 Democratic votes in the Senate, every one of those senators can make or break a deal. Democrats want this bill on the president's desk before those unemployment benefits expire March 14th. But this Senate bill will still have to be reconciled with a House bill. That House bill included direct checks for more people with.
Something we'll be watching over the weekend. Mary Alice Parks on Capitol Hill, thanks so much.
Pope Francis has been celebrating Mass in Iraq during the first ever papal visit to the country, attended by dozens of masked worshippers. Earlier, the pontiff held talks with one of the most powerful figures in Shia Islam on the second day of his trip to Iraq. The US government says it's concerned there are a large number of victims from a hack on Microsoft's email software, which the tech firm has blamed on China. The security forces in Myanmar have used stun grenades and tear gas against protesters across the country. There have been further allegations of police brutality. So far, more than 50 people have been killed in the protests. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has won a confidence vote in Parliament days after suffering an unexpected political setback. He called the vote after his finance minister failed to win a seat in the Senate.